My hello, good afternoon.
You too. I'm glad to see you again. How are you?
Very well, yeah. Looking forward to the holiday.
Yeah, I already have begun my holidays.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm really excited.
Tomorrow is the last work day for me, so
Yeah, just 24 hours more.
yeah.
I
How
have
are
a
you?
very beautiful film, actually. Two films, two Romanian films. One was the one that won something in Berlin.
Okay.
Sex or something,
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know.
And Sierra Nevada, which was even better.
Sierra Nevada is very good, in fact, yeah.
Actually, it was my favorite, yeah.
But where did you see them?
We have a kind of, a streaming channel which is paid. It's not expensive,
Okay.
very, very cheap in Greece. And it specializes in movies that go, independent movies that go to festivals, not American movies, whatever is relatively cheap in a sense.
Okay.
Yeah, so very good quality, but it's not
Okay.
blockbusters. That's it. So
Okay.
I was surprised by Sierra Nevada.
Sierra Nevada is really,
I really loved it. The way he filmed it was excellent.
yeah.
And how are you?
Yeah, as good as it can be for
Yeah,
the time being. Yeah,
yeah,
hoping for some better year instead of us. So
yeah. Let's hope. I'm not that optimistic. I used to be very optimistic 3 months ago, but I am afraid we're going to have a longer confinement period or semi-confinement period than we expected.
yeah. But how are things in Greece now? Is it are you in lockdown or is it?
No, we don't
No.
have a lockdown, though we should probably had something of a confinement in the
Okay.
sense where, everything works, everything is open. You have to prove that you are vaccinated to go into a shop or something like that. But in reality, in places like Crete, for instance, nobody really checks.
Okay.
They say, okay, we trust you, something like that. Okay.
Okay.
So things are going not well. We have a large number of people in intensive care, probably more than we should. And there's a lot of, at least 100 people die every day or are supposed to die from COVID.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's it's about the same in Romania. Yeah.
yeah.
So similar situation. Yeah.
So this can be a problem. Actually, yeah, this is not bright, and I don't see any kind of
Yeah.
of clear signal
Indeed.
that
Yeah.
things will go better. Everybody says that after Christmas we're going to have a larger number of people sick in intensive care or dying, but nobody really knows.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
government has said that there is no money, so forget more doctors. They were trying to open up 4,000 new positions for priests. Probably they're expecting,
Okay.
or dead people, so they would have to bury them or somehow. But finally, they decided not to have 4,000 more priests, but they don't want to take any more doctors. Seems
Okay.
so. Yeah, right. And I don't know. Let's hope that sometime next year we can see each other really.
Yeah. I was looking forward to the workshop in October, in fact, but yeah, which was postponed to May or June?
We shall see. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
we're planning our next economic history congress in Greece for September, for end of September this year.
Mm.
We have decided to hold it only live or nothing.
Okay. Mm.
I mean, we are hoping for the best, but no, 3 months ago we were much more optimistic, and now I don't really know.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. And also seeing what happens now in countries that have more people vaccinated, we are not very optimistic also, yeah.
So Constantin, we're usually beginning like in the theater, a quarter after the announced
Okay.
time. So
Okay.
that's why I'm,
No problem.
I'm doing some small talk, but
Yeah.
this is a tradition in Greece. Since
Yeah.
we're not Germany, we always begin quarter past or something like that.
We also have this tradition, probably from the Fanariot.
Yeah. Although they would have loved to be called Europeans, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to send the stuff, but yeah.
And how are you? What do you do now?
Actually, I'm doing small articles here or there. We are working on the archives of the Greek interworld land reform, and we have processing the archives. They're very massive, about 1,700 large estates.
Oh.
And there has never been a kind of global aggregates assessment.
Okay.
We have a kind of intermediary assessment, but there has never been really a full official assessment of the land reform, although we have the data. So we are trying to, at the same time, build this final assessment and understand land reform as it was really implemented on local and regional level, because it had huge impact on the political system. The lawyers that were more or less were the lawyers of the rural cooperatives that were the allotees, then followed, many of them, a political career. So we are trying to understand what kind of political and social changes have been impacted by the land reform on local and regional level. And it's a larger, in the beginning we hope that in 2 or 3 years we would have a clear picture. We do have a clear picture, but not the global assessment, because there is a lot of stuff that's not 100% clear and correct, and we must find the exact number. There are some places that are not clearly indicated geographically, so we have a lot of small stuff that has to be clarified beforehand.
Okay.
That's what we're hoping, that in a 2-year time, going to have the final full picture, more or less.
Okay.
And it will be online. We're planning to put it on the map and just give the archive, the database publicly, open it publicly. And we have a lot of questions concerning how did they really function.
Okay, yeah.
Because we know that there were large estates, but who gave the order? Because you have group of families that are landowners. It's not clear to me how they made decisions. Nothing is written down. So we have those kind of small problems as well that have to be solved beforehand. And we are going to, I mean, I'm not pessimistic, but it takes much longer than I expected.
Okay.
And hopefully, and I'm starting to be interested in the Romanian case as well.
Yeah, the Romanian case is, I don't think that, I mean, in recent years, I don't think there's someone who looked at this with this sort of more digital tools and so on.
Yeah.
We still rely on some works from the 70s. There was some work in the last years on the communist collectivization process. This was important, but not the interwar land reforms. There was one very large one in 1921, and then there was a second one in 1945, and immediately after when the communists came, they started to have this collectivization process in which they confiscated the land. And
yeah, no, I'm much more interested in the interwar.
Yeah, that's really large. That's really large, and it was very contested even during the interwar period because of similar problems that you. Because of.
I mean, I think that even Cusa's reform back in the 19th century was also. I mean, you have a long series of reforms.
Yeah.
Of which I know very little, and I've just been able to locate and download Mitrani's work.
Okay, yeah.
It's online, actually. I mean, somewhere in the world, I don't know where I found it. And I had the opportunity to download it a few days ago. I was looking for it and finally got it.
Yeah.
So here we are, and Zelina is actually, she will be with us in a few minutes because she is actually in a thesis defense.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah. She will come with us. So let me just present Professor Dr. Constantin Ardeleanu, who teaches in the University of Danube, Dunarea de Ios in Galați. He's a very well-known colleague. We have worked together in the Black Sea project, and he has been kind enough to accept to give us a talk today on steamships, the transportation revolution and sociality along the Danube and in the Black Sea from 1830 to 1860. Constantin, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thanks, Socrates, and thanks to everyone for being here today. It's almost a holiday, so I really appreciate you make the time to be with us today. I also have a presentation. I hope you can see it. Yes. So my talk today is part of a research interest I have had for several years. This has resulted in the publication of an article in the Journal of Transportation History last year, and very recently in this very nice book, which unfortunately is in Romanian. I will continue to work on the topic, and hopefully in a year or so, I will be able to publish a monograph in English on steamship sociality at the beginnings of the industrialization and commodification of transportation in the 19th century. So the book is called By Boat from Vienna to Constantinople to Istanbul, Travelers, Spaces, Images. That's the full name of the book. I will speak today about steamships and the effects of the transportation revolution in Southeastern Europe. I will refer to how steamship navigation was introduced on the river Danube and in the Black Sea, thus allowing passengers to travel in a relatively simple, inexpensive and secure way between two of Europe's iconic capitals, Vienna and Constantinople or Istanbul. I will start with details on the Austrian company which ran the line and then speak about social life on board these steamships. So in September 1830, Francis I, a state-of-the-art Austrian steamship, which you can see in this image here, cruised from Vienna to the city of Pest, half of what is now Hungary's capital of Budapest. The voyage took about 15 hours, and the return trip upstream the Danube was completed in 48 hours, or 2 days. The trip was the initiative of private entrepreneurs who established the Danube Steamship Company, or Donau Dampfschifffahrtsgesellschaft, abbreviated DDSG. The DDSG exists to this day, and in Vienna you can enjoy a tour along the Donau Canal or to Bratislava on board one of the cruise ships, this really historic company. The maiden trip of Francis I, a vessel named to honor the Austrian emperor, was a huge success, and the steamship was immediately imagined as the binder of the Habsburg monarchy along its economic backbone, the river Danube. After all, the monarchy was the Danubian empire, with the river and its tributaries constituting God-given highways that needed just little work to connect all the different provinces of the empire around Vienna as the imperial core of the state. The company was established in 1829 by two British entrepreneurs, with the Austrian government granting them a monopoly for Danube navigation. A joint stock company, it attracted the interest of several Viennese businessmen and political leaders. With an initial capital of 100,000 Austrian florins, the company built the body of its first steamship, the already mentioned Francis I, in the shipyard of Erdberg, close to Vienna, so in a local shipyard. The ship was equipped with a 60 horsepower engine produced by Boulton and Watt, one of the leading British manufacturers of the time. The first financial prospects were so good that money started to virtually pour in. By 1840, the company's capital was 30 times bigger, that is 3 million florins. New river vessels were built, but the company also eyed maritime business. In 1834, 2 maritime steamships were built in Trieste, and the Austrian company pushed to conquer the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea markets. By 1836, its ships covered several other routes besides that between Vienna and Constantinople, with Istanbul as its main Levantine hub. So the company had lines to Trebizond, aiming at the prospects of Georgia, Transcaucasia, and Persia, to Smyrna, Izmir, and to Salonika. Competition, however, was fierce, with British, French, and the rival Austrian company, the Österreichischer Lloyd or Austrian Lloyd, very active in all these regions. Politics, both domestic and international, played a huge part in the success of the DDSG. The company was founded at difficult times for the Eastern question, with the Russian-Ottoman War of 1828-29, the Greek War of Independence, the Egyptian crisis of the early 1830s, and the Convention of Unchiar-Skelessi, endangering the frail political balance of the region. To Chancellor Metternich, to Austria's Chancellor Metternich, the DDSG became a perfect tool to advance Austrian interests in the Near East. So the Viennese government supported the company to force its way into the Black Sea. The DDSG was very important for the Viennese government, but it was as crucial for the Hungarian elites, which embraced it wholeheartedly and regarded this company as a way to increase Hungary's prosperity and to contribute to its economic and hopefully political independence. One such patriot was Count Széchenyi István, nicknamed the Greatest Hungarian, a liberal and reformist aristocrat who embarked on the project to take steamships beyond the Iron Gates Gorge and thus open the lower Danube and the Black Sea to Hungarian trade. The gorge, where the Danube crosses the Carpathian Mountains, is a long, narrow and shallow pass which posed many obstacles to river navigation. Huge underwater rocks made shipping completely dangerous and economically unrewarding. Few river crafts ventured through the gorge, so commercial connections between the middle Danube and the lower Danube via the river are almost inexistent. Together with a Hungarian engineer, Vásárhelyi Paul, Széchenyi aimed to tame the river and make this insurmountable gorge navigable. The Hungarians brought Western knowledge and technology to the region and managed to remove some of the most perilous rocks in the riverbed. This is how the gorge looked like in a contemporary sketch. In 1834, nature was on the Hungarian side. Being a very dry year, with the river at a historical low, the Hungarian engineer managed not only to map the underwater rocks, but also to take a steamship beyond the Iron Gates. It was a symbolic steamship indeed, called Argo, with the new imperial Argonauts ready to embark in a new quest to find the Golden Fleece in the Black Sea. A fluvial steamship, Argo covered the section between the Iron Gates and Galați, where the maritime Danube, which is accessible to seagoing ships, starts. So in 1836, the last piece of the puzzle was added, with a steamship plying from Galați to Constantinople, so that the entire route from Vienna to Istanbul was finally fully functional. So the journey between Vienna and Constantinople was a complex endeavor. It consisted, in fact, of several stages, so that the passenger would change 4 steamships in different hubs along the river. Each section was serviced by a steamship fit for the traffic of that respective leg. The most crowded and profitable section was that between Vienna and Budapest, with daily runs and with the ships almost always overcrowded. The voyage downstream was done in about 12 hours and upstream in about 24 hours. The second stage covered the Hungarian Danube between Budapest and the entrance into the Iron Gates Gorge. The distance was covered in 2 to 4 days, depending on weather conditions. Along the gorge, passengers were taken either in small vessels or by land, where Széchenyi cut open a very picturesque mountain road. With some more hydraulic works in the river and advances in shipbuilding technology, by the 1840s, smaller crafts could safely navigate in the Iron Gates region. Beyond the gorge, due to epidemiological regulations, steamships plied alternatively along the Bulgarian or the Romanian bank, so never touching on both sides of the river. So they would touch upon the right bank at the Ottoman towns of Vidin, Ruse, Silistra, or Cernavoda, and on the Wallachian or Romanian one at Calafat, Giurgiu, Brăila, and Galați. 3 to 4 days were needed to get to Galați here, where the local lazaretto was a plague-free zone, allowing passengers to continue their journey to Constantinople. It took 2.5 more days to get to the Ottoman capital. To save time, the company also introduced an overland shuttle service across Dobrogea, so from here, from Cernavoda to Constanța. This would save about 300 kilometers and 2 days of travel time. All in all, in the late 1830s, the journey between Vienna and Constantinople took about 2 weeks, 14 days downstream and up to 20 days upstream the river. With hydraulic works and better time management in connection hubs, but also with faster steamships, travel time decreased to 7 to 10 days just before the Crimean War. So travel time was about half of what it used to be in the 1830s. This did not include time spent in lazarettos for quarantine, but international quarantine agreements contributed to also reduce the periods of compulsory epidemiological confinement. No need and no time to insist on the logistical challenges of keeping this line functional, with shipyards and mechanical workshops established along the Danube, with coal mines opened in the Carpathians, with inns and travel agencies established in all of these hubs or in the larger cities of Southeastern Europe. By the 1840s, the DDSG was profitable for its Habsburg domestic lines, but the Ottoman sections ran with some loss. The DDSG management discussed options and eventually decided to sell their maritime operations and focus on river shipping. In 1844, the seagoing fleet, consisting of 7 steamships, was sold to the Austrian Lloyd, an agreement mediated by Chancellor Metternich and the imperial government in Vienna. The agreement was that the entire line from Vienna to Constantinople should be kept functional just as before. The DDSG got its river navigation monopoly extended, and it agreed to carry the Austrian postal mail for free along all its lines. It remained a private company, but the state acquired the right to supervise its operations and, if needed, to intervene in its management. To many in the region, it was clear that it equally advanced the interests not only of its shareholders, but also of the Austrian government. So it was regarded as a sort of a semi-official company of the Austrian government. The company continued to grow. In 1844, its riverine fleet numbered 20 steamships and 36 schleps, or engineless crafts for cargo transportation. Before the Crimean War, it had 71 steamships and 233 schleps, so almost 300 vessels all in all for river navigation. This fleet started to become more and more specialized, with passenger and cargo ships better fitted for the specific needs of different sections of the river and of its main tributaries. I also want to add that nothing changed from a passenger perspective along the maritime section of an inter-imperial run after the DDSG seagoing fleet was sold to the Austrian Lloyd. Ships met in the Danubian hub of Galați according to a tight schedule, and passengers were taken as smoothly as possible towards their destination. Through an agreement with the Russian Black Sea Steamship Company, a Russian vessel plied from Odessa to Galați at the same time with the Austrian vessels, thus opening a direct line between Vienna and the Ukrainian provinces of the Russian Empire. So I stop here with all these organizational details and return to such aspects during the discussions if you are interested. I will now focus on the social dimension of cruising and speak about the social interactions engendered by the transportation revolution with reference to the steamship connection between Vienna and Constantinople. But first, some theoretical remarks on my topic. Launched by Michel Foucault, the idea of ships as floating spaces and heterotopias has been recently fleshed out by scholars who look at ships as contact zones in which different cultures meet. The passage itself was analyzed in an article by Michael David Offerman and Roland Velselhumer, who view the ship's space as a historical arena, a zone of cultural contact and interaction, with all its transcultural phenomena arising as a consequence. With their spaces, places, times, and scales, and the journeys they make possible, ships have entered the focus of historical research through the lens of mobilities thinking too. Some scholars discern between ships' mobilities and shipped mobilities and emphasize ships' function as a global connector. Other scholars agree on this role, adding that ships have been studied merely as movable objects that connect different geographical points, but not as historical environments in themselves. Hence, their interest goes towards the onboard, regarded as a mobile spatiality and as a laboratory in and through which historians can observe processes of transformation. Connections are mediators, and being in transit or in between comes with various experiences, aspects that have not generally been very visible in historiography. There's a direct link between mobility and social interactions, and scholars such as David Bissell, Mimi Scheller, or John Urry have produced great pieces, especially in connection with the mobilities paradigm on how the experience of passengers shifts in modern means of transportation between known and unknown, public and private, national and cosmopolitan. The transportation revolution came in the 19th century with an important social component that is included in the ticket fare, as Wolfgang Schivel-Busch proved in his seminal book on the industrialization of the railway journey. As a sort of a historiographical conclusion, few scholars have turned their attention to the time of the passage itself, let alone to questions of socio-cultural interaction on board. When this has been done, transcontinental voyages in the late 19th centuries and early 20th centuries have usually been studied. So one of my claims in my book is that the steam engine also fueled a revolution in social relations. In contrast to other great ideas or mechanisms, it was groundbreaking as it moved the engine, as it moved outside experimental laboratories and mechanical workshops to practically impact society at large. Steamships are, of course, a vital component of this story everywhere they plied, but I will insist now on river steamships and how a fluvial cruise is different from an open sea or maritime one. There are several ways in which such a river cruise is different. Firstly, it is a bit safer than a maritime cruise, with less dangers when the ship may be caught at gales, for example, in open sea. Dangers do exist and shipwrecks regularly occurred, but the relatively safer voyage allowed passengers to spend more time on the deck, with a 360 degrees panoramic view of the space around and on the vessel. Through their architectural design, fluvial steamships privilege open spaces to private cabins, making social encounters part and parcel of the cruise. As for a journey along the Danube, it was interesting also given the function of the river along its lower section. As a borderline separating the Austrian, Russian, and Ottoman empires, the Danube was at the same time a transportation highway, an international waterway that allowed passengers to directly witness the little-known corner of Southeast Europe. Not least of all, time was an important factor for social interactions. Spending 2 weeks together with other voyagers was plenty of time to bond and establish sometimes very strong connections. By the 1840s, a Danubian cruise was a popular way of traveling between East and West, heavily advertised by the DDSG and including in all the popular travel guides of the age. The Austrian steamships started to be crowded with passengers who traveled between the two empires for touristic or business reasons. They usually chose this route due to, let's call them, objective and subjective reasons. It was also possible to board a French steamship in Marseille or an Austrian one in Trieste and get in 2 weeks to Constantinople. But that was usually an even more tedious and tiresome voyage that was also at least as long as the Danubian cruise. Traveling overland from Vienna to Istanbul was an even more difficult journey. An overland journey between the two capitals covered about 1,500 kilometers, lasted for about 15 days and took passengers across two completely different cultures of travel. On the one hand, the Austrian Empire invested heavily in modern roads and an efficient postal service. In the Ottoman Empire, on the other hand, roads were mostly regarded in relation to their military function. Some roads were rather well kept, but the transportation facilities were not always up to modern standards for tourists. A good example to illustrate the problems of inland traveling is that of officer James Edward Alexander, who traveled between Istanbul and Vienna in 1826. Voyaging in Ottoman territories was impossible without hiring a Tartar courier, Alexander said. The Tartar would lead voyagers and provide them with accommodation and food. There were plenty of perils along the way, from wild animals to robbers, and the Tartar guide was extremely precious in preventing any such encounters. The roads were extremely bad, and the distance was covered entirely on horseback. In Wallachia, travelers were taken in primitive carts along bad roads that shook the body and mind of poor travelers. In Austrian territory, voyagers proceeded, however, in much better carriages, and in 4 days went from Sibiu to Vienna. In such conditions, with insecure roads and improper accommodation and provisioning infrastructure across the Balkans, a steamship voyage along the Danube was one of the favorite choices of travelers heading to or coming to the Levant. During the 1840s, Vienna became the main hub for travelers from Western, Northern, and Central Europe who wanted to travel to all destinations in the Levant. And this connection contributed to attract an even larger number of tourists to the region. The industrialization and commodification of traveling by means of the Austrian steamships solved many of the problems of those who did not enjoy a longer sea travel and added a different sort of charm to the journey. A cruise consists of two different social realities, about which I will speak a bit now. One is an inner level experience, that is the social life related to the ad hoc cosmopolitan community which the traveler becomes part when he or she boarded the Austrian steamship. The second social reality, or the outer level, derived from the spatial and temporal dimension along which steamships and voyagers moved, that is derived from the historical and political realities specific to Southeastern Europe, the region these travelers could now better know and explore. Now my presentation will turn to this inner level of cruising. And as I was mentioning, ships have been regarded as floating spaces, heterotopias, or contact zones in which different cultures meet. They are equally arenas of global history, and this novel and popular travel route connecting two large European capitals opened not only new economic opportunities, but also new forms of social encounters. The Danube cruising was extremely popular since the 1830s, selling a wide range of tickets that suited all pockets. The DDSG filled its steamboats with a clientele of various ethnicities, religions, and social strata. Some statistical details are illustrative of the differences in quantitative and qualitative terms between the domestic and international segments of the journey. The busiest leg was that between Vienna and Budapest. followed by that on the Hungarian Danube, which carried travelers from Budapest to the Iron Gates. By the early 1840s, the DDSG had 20 steamships on these two domestic segments, and most passengers, or about 90%, paid first or second class fares. Less than half of the passengers traveled first and second class along the lower Danube, from the Iron Gates to Galați. From Galați, the last leg took passengers to Constantinople on board a maritime steamship, and more than 80% of passengers paid third class or deck fares. So as you go downstream from Vienna, more and more people will travel on the deck, not in the inner cabin. In view of such data, the voyage between Vienna and Constantinople saw a gradual downgrade in the number of and status of passengers, with an increasing share of them traveling on the deck. Customers during the entire trip dully noticed this social catabasis. One did not have to leave the steamship to witness the passage into a different cultural but also social world. To French architect Félix Pigery on the Habsburg Danube, and I quote, "European passengers, figures and costumes dominated the social landscape. But beyond the Iron Gates, ethnic and religious variety became more striking, making the journey a deep dive into," and I quote again, "the exotic Orient, regarded with all its cliches and prejudices, as Edward Said has masterfully showed in his book." Travelers insisted on this cosmopolitanism, regarded in various forms through the physiognomies, clothing, and languages spoken by their fellow passengers. From the inner cabin to the outer deck, a steamship was like an aquarium in which different social species coexisted and analyzed each other for the duration of the trip. When this Félix Pigery traveled on the river in the 1850s, the vessel's bow accommodated a mixture of Jews, Armenians, Greeks, Serbians, Bulgarians, and the stern part of the ship was divided into two parts, one assigned to Europeans and the other exclusively reserved for Turks and other sons of Islam. A tent protected the Muslims who could practice their religion without fear of being disturbed or ridiculed by the Westerners. If such segregation was functional for lower class uncivilized passengers, cabins were open for all paying customers, irrespective of ethnicity or religion. So the cabins were regarded as very democratic spaces. In their accounts, travelers insist as much on their mobility along the Danube as on their social excursion into the ship's ad hoc community. An example is illustrative for the diversity of such a group. The first class cabin of the steamship, which took Frenchman Jacques Boucher de Perthes from Istanbul in 1853, was occupied by the wife of a Moldavian boyar, her daughter, her retinue, some other Greek or Frankish women, merchants, consuls, diplomatic attachés, or members of the military administration. The second class cabin was shared by Italian, German, Polish, and Hungarian officers, packed together with Greek and Armenian clerks and agents. Third class passengers traveled on deck in a group that consisted mainly of Turkish or Albanian soldiers, Bulgarian, Wallachians, Moldavians, Serbs, Dalmatians, Jews, and Russians. Social interactions were interesting and diverse. Everyday activities depended on season and weather conditions. Passengers were usually engaged in talking, listening, smoking, musing, whistling, or singing. Card playing was a favorite pastime for men, but some social games mobilized the interest, curiosity, and merriment of the entire party. So I will skip a bit just to say that the steamship was a sort of a moving Babel tower. Weather permitting, men would go on deck and get a shot at ducks or other wildfowl flying near the steamship. Two very important social encounters on board our steamships were eating and sleeping. Nothing disciplines body and group better than our need to eat. Meals were an important part of the mobile social program of travelers. Deck travelers ate from their own provisions, while upper and middle class passengers were served meals in the public cabin, which doubled as an eatery. Meals were not included in the ticket fare, but restaurateurs provided refreshments to interested customers. Travelers had various opinions on the quality of meals, but serving meals was part of an interesting social ritual. With very crowded cabins, meal times came not only with aristocratic etiquette, but also with agitation in the cabin and a rude contest for chairs. But with few, if any, private cabins available, it was sleeping that challenged the boundaries between the private and the public space. As a collective bedroom for a cosmopolitan group of travelers, cabin and deck are the perfect setting for studying the social components of sleep. At bedtime, cabins were instantly crowded, and a competition for some sort of comfortability started. Sometimes passengers had actual fist fights for the best sleeping spots available. Sleep was threatened by many enemies, which also challenged social roles in the cabin. Fleas or mosquitoes were such nuisances, but the size of the group came with its own threats, such as bad odors and snoring. Javier Marmier insisted on the terrible cacophony of 42 German, Hungarian, and Slavic noses, which sang the most fantastic concert on all the tones of the range. With few available social areas, and as the cabin being at the same time a living room and a bedroom, sleeping was regulated not by biological needs, but by social norms. Games and conversations continued late into the night, and sleeping needed to conform to the dictates of this new social order. Sleeping conditions also challenged established social and gender roles in the mobile community. Sleeping dress was one of the first sources of cultural shock. When the time of repose arrived, each passenger would undress as much as he or she thought fit. British traveler Charles Elliot readily mentioned the moment when, and I quote, a girl of 17, her mother and another female disrobed themselves in the presence of 20 men and in the full light of 6 candles. End of quotation. Conversing with fellow travelers was another common activity. Social encounters were often mediated by members of the crew. Englishmen, Italians, or Dalmatians served as captains of the steamships, and they acted also as masters of ceremony for the noble guests on board their vessels. The crew included engineers, pilots, gendarmes, travel agents, all of them endowed with nautical and social roles. Each group in the cabin would blend around some very sociable characters that mobilized the attention of everyone. Princes, ambassadors, pashas, high officers could act as such VIPs, but sometimes they were just funny and sociable characters who imposed themselves as informal group leaders. Good linguistic abilities were crucial for making the travel comfortable, and the trip was an excursion through linguistic spaces and preferences. Members of 11 nations boarded the Boreas at Galați in 1852 and shared the cabin with Lawrence Oliphant. To this British author, the steamship was also this sort of Babel Tower where one could hear Greek, Moldavian, Italian, German, French, Russian, or Arabic. Most travelers in upper class cabins were multilingual and they met on a lingua franca. French and German were such international languages on the upper Danube, and you see a gradual change from German to French between the Habsburg section of the river and the Ottoman one. Now a bit about the second or outer level of cruising, which was as important as the inner one, given that many voyagers spent most of their time on the ship's deck watching around. Traveling through space-time and getting to know different sites of interest along the Danube was a social act mediated either by written sources such as guidebooks or maps, or by the interactions with fellow passengers who disseminated local knowledge about geographical places and historical times. Charles Eliot refers in detail to such a case when native gentlemen on board the steamship pointed out every object of note in our route, furnishing the name and history of each successive locality. The image of the geographical and historical landscape is always mediated by a traveler's cultural background, which educated his or her gaze. Guidebooks and travelogues were extremely popular at the time, and they would instruct voyagers on what was picturesque and worth seeing. Picturesque sites are thus served as in a menu, while illustrated volumes prepared passengers for what they had to expect. One of these famous volumes is that of William Beatty, who wrote the narrative, while the illustrations were done by William Bartlett, one of the world's best-known landscape artists of the age. And you'll see several images that are taken from this volume. So the cruise between Vienna and Istanbul was very instructive for voyagers interested in European history. From Vienna to Budapest, one could admire the scene of Rudolf of Habsburg's victory over Ottokar of Bohemia. One could meet Napoleon at different sites, interesting for the conflict between Napoleon and the Austrian Empire. There are many interesting sites where one could meet Jan Sobieski, Attila, the Knights Templar, Augustus, or different other historical characters. I will just say that on the lower section of the river, travelers would always look at sites interesting for the history of Suleiman the Magnificent, Peter the Hermit, John Huniadi, Prince Eugene of Savoy, Apollodorus of Damascus, Roman Emperor Trajan, the Dacian King Decebalus, Sigismund of Hungary, Sultan Bayezid, Catherine the Great, or even Achilles in the Serpent's Island. So a site that passengers found especially picturesque was the Iron Gates Gorge, a narrow valley with stunning steep cliffs that charmed passengers. The area is a mixture of natural beauty and history, with plenty of legends about perilous rocks, deep caves that hid dangerous bandits, the remarkable bridge built by the order of Roman Emperor Trajan, poisonous mosquitoes, and romantic ruins. It was the ultimate landscape, with the rumblings of Danube's cataracts, the fury of waves, and the majestic flight of eagles. In the midst of the river, there was an island, which is now submerged, Ada Kaleh, where a poor pasha defended from his frail fortification the failing Ottoman territories. All these romantic elements made the Austrian steamship even more special as a messenger of civilization, crossing not only through such picturesque scenery, but also through a magic door in space and time. My interest for the DDSG also comes in relation to the Romanian principalities, as it was this company that linked Wallachia and Moldavia to Europe, and thus contributed tremendously to the making of the Romanian nation and nation state. It did so in two ways: by allowing Romanians to travel to Europe, and by bringing foreigners to visit the Romanian principalities and report back about their political situation and economic prospects. It is a cliché of Romanian historiography to say that the making of modern Romania was the result of the activity of of an enlightened elite educated in Western Europe. However, seldom do we look at how they got there. My claim is that it was exactly this relative facility of traveling on board steamships and railways that was part of experiencing Europeanness. As a motivational quote says, in my paper, it is not about the destination, it is about the journey. Steamships and railways meant and brought mobility, prosperity, civilization. Several of the founders of the Romanian nation, such as Ion Ghica or Mihail Gogălnicianu, published elaborated articles on how modern communication contributed to bringing together the European nations. Railways and steamships were not merely means of transport, but they had an even greater mission as the most powerful agent of civilization and freedom. This is a quote from Gogălnicianu. For Romanian elites, the steamboat's cabin was a space of social learning and of displaying elegant manners and thus feeling part of civilized Europe. The saloon of the steamship allowed well-to-do Moldavians and Wallachians to mingle with Europe's notabilities. For a Moldavian boyar who embarked on a steamship at Galați, mobility meant nobility. And he mentioned some of his high-ranking companions, the Prince of Liechtenstein, the Count of Montenuovo, and several Hungarian nobles, who enabled his voyage to gain in social prestige. For more liberal people, the steamship was a progressive environment that contributed to the political modernization of their backward states. Politics was a common topic of discussion among travelers, and moving freely between East and West, the steamship allowed the circulation of both modern ideas and the actual people that started the revolution of 1848 in the principalities. Turned into an increasingly popular means of transportation, the steamship became a setting portrayed in theatrical plays that mocked the habits of westernized local elites. Also, I would just briefly mention that through this steamship connection, thousands of foreign travelers crossed Romanian territories since the 1830s. If before the introduction of steamship navigation, there are relatively few travel accounts from voyagers who lost their way in southeastern Europe, since the mid-1830s, the number of such travel accounts increased exponentially. At least 2/3 of known narratives about the Danubian principalities come from passengers on board the Austrian steamships. All of them referred in detail to the political, economic, and social situation of the Danubian principalities and to the intrigues used by Russia to control these territories. Such travel literature contributed decisively to the popularization of the Romanian question, which in the context of the Crimean War favored the unification of the two principalities and the formation of modern Romania. Now a few words on the decline of this travel route. The biggest enemy of technology is even newer technology. The DDSG faced a huge competition with the coming of railways to the region. Already in the 1840s, railways in Austria covered large sections along the Danube, and by 1850, Vienna and Budapest were connected by railway. Railway lines were then built in Banat, so by late 1850s, there was a continuous right to the borders of the Habsburg monarchy. When railway infrastructure started to be built in Romania and the Ottoman Empire, it also orbited towards the river, aiming to reduce the time of the busy but already slow Danubian connection. The railway of Dobroja saved 2 days, for example, while that between Rusa and Varna in Bulgaria, both completed in the 1860s, saved 1 more day. To end my presentation, the biggest success but also a serious blow to the Danubian steamship connection was the completion of railways in Transylvania and Romania. In 1883, a direct train, the famous Orient Express, took passengers from Paris via Vienna and Bucharest to Istanbul in 3 days. Later, when Romania built the bridge at Cernavodă, the bridge over the Danube, travel time was shortened even more, and the distance between Vienna and Istanbul was covered in about 50 hours, so about 2 days. It was a massive race to gain time, a new phase in the industrialization of traveling. And conclusion now, as a global phenomenon, traveling means more than modern infrastructure, fast vehicles, or massive propelling power. It also comes with an inherent social dimension which appeared and evolved concurrently with the industrialization and commodification of transportation. The transportation revolution of the 19th century brought increased speed and comfort, but also novel forms of social encounters for the passengers who boarded steamships or trains. In connection with such new trends in transportation history, my presentation has framed the place of steamship traveling within the emergent pattern of mobile sociality. Steamship navigation on the Danube and in the Black Sea on board Austrian vessels became one of the most popular routes linking west and east. It was a relatively fast, secure, and comfortable travel option, so thousands of passengers used it every year to travel between Vienna and Constantinople. Gliding between two worlds, the Austrian steamship served as an inter-imperial contact zone in more than its function as a connector between two of the world's most attractive cities. According to various descriptions used in my volume and in my presentation, the steamship's cabins and decks were mobile microcosms in which global actors were brought together by their need to travel. For most middle and upper class authors, the saloon was the center of this universe in which the more financially potent travelers met, interacted, and oftentimes formed a community for which togetherness was part of the traveling experience. Living in the same physical space came with sharing not only precious knowledge about the destinations ahead of them, but also with sharing social practices or norms. The Austrian steamship was turned into a site of global connections and busy sociality, a perfect example of how mobility and sociality come hand in hand and infringe upon the already flexible border between private and public spaces. Confined on board for a period of about 2 weeks, travelers explored new mobile temporalities rooted in the cosmopolitan community's ad hoc practices, which varied from mealtime to bedtime and which pushed voyagers to adapt to the social conviviality of their vehicle. Regarded through the prism of such personal and necessarily subjective travel accounts, the steamship becomes a fascinating arena of global history, a connector and mediator in between spatial, cultural, and social worlds. Commodified travel came with expectations of affordability, reliability, and convenience, but also with a rich social life that became part of the experience of mass transportation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Constantin. It was really, I'm thinking of going to Vienna and take the boat myself.
Okay.
Yeah. I've never been there. It's a pity.
You should.
Yeah,
you should. You should do it. There's a very prosperous cruising industry on the river, so definitely is worth doing it.
Okay.
Hi, Constantin. I'm sorry, I just came from a PhD thesis defense, which took 2.5 hours, but I will look at it, and I'm sure that it was wonderful. And you have promised me many, many years ago that you'll take me on a cruise on the Danube. You take me to one, but you fooled me. It was only 15 minutes or 20.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to do it.
Yes.
Okay, so you can raise your hand through the specific possibilities that Zoom gives you, or I'm expecting your questions. Minas Antipas.
Good evening. Thank you, Professor Ardeleanu, for this presentation. My question is, what was the attitude of the Danubian Greeks towards the cruise lines? I mean, apart from their role in the Danubian commercial shipping, did they have any shares in these lines, or did they accept a supplementary role having ownership in sledges or small boats, especially the Ionian ship owners of the Danubian cities?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Is a bit beyond what I presented today. This focus on the period of the 1830s to the 1860s. This Austrian company, as I was mentioning, also started to invest heavily in cargo transportation. They were the ones to build a huge fleet of schleps on the river. They had specialized vessels for the transportation of grain, for the transportation of pigs, and so on. And it was only after the Crimean War when this activity of Greeks started to be relevant for the fluvial river, as it was only, as I was saying, as it was only in the 50s that hydraulic works at the iron gates allowed them to freely travel in that region. So the Greeks are very important for this sort of schleps trafficking along the lower Danube, but this is very important a bit later in the 19th century. For this period, usually it was quite expensive to have shipping upstream the river, and there were very few steamships used as tugboats to take schleps upstream the river. So it was usually, cargo transportation was done in small vessels. In Romanian, we call them cârlace. Usually they were these. When the cârlace got to Brăila, they were disassembled. They were torn into pieces because it was not efficient enough to take them back upstream the river. It was only starting with the 1860s that more solid vessels started to be used, and also when tugboats started to be used to take all these schleps upstream the river. And the Greeks are very important for this. This is usually a story that was very well presented in the book by Spiridon Focas, for example. He shows how important the Greeks were for this sort of river trade. What I'm interested in this paper, at least, is the passenger transportation, and of course the Austrian company is very relevant. It was the only one, and there was this Russian company plying from Galați to Odessa, and this is really important for how the Greeks built their business, because this meant reliable communication. You needed the specimens of grain to get from Brăila to Constantinople or to other destinations in a reliable time. You needed to be sure that you can carry such specimens, and also the tradesmen themselves. So the transportation of passengers was equally important in establishing the network. And it was the huge growth of the river traffic in relation to grain and so on in schleps is only relevant a bit later than I presented today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Agapanos. Nico?
Yeah, hello, Professor. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I enjoyed very much the representation you did, that as you go downstream, the mix of the passengers change slowly. I was wondering, as the traveling becomes more populous, there is more people being carried back and forth. Where are these people going other than the nobles who are doing this for tourism? Do we know, is it for employment? Is it for, I don't know, other reasons? Do we have some sort of analysis on that front? Thank you.
Yeah, we have some data, not much. There's a huge difference between the all these domestic lines in the Habsburg Empire. So, for example, from Vienna to Budapest, this was everyone that needed to travel, and we have for this area, by the 1850s, there were thousands of people traveling each day, and there were several vessels plying every day between the two destinations. They also created in many ways the domestic market for transportation. I studied in some more details the lower sections of the river and the run from Galați to Constantinople, and wanted to see who were those who traveled on board these steamships. And there were about, so for every cruise, the steamship was full every time. It was difficult we have this data for some years, not for all of them. The problem is, as I was saying, for example, the most important steamship that ran on this leg, called Ferdinando. This had 16 private cabins, which they organized due to increased demand. There were this sort of collective saloons, and then everyone else traveled on the deck for 2.5 days. And we know that it was always full. So more than 100 people traveled for every such cruise. Who were they? It depended a lot. There were many people in the region going to. There were tourists, of course, all nations, heading from Vienna to Constantinople, and then doing in a sort of 19th century version of the Grand Tour, going to Alexandria, going to the holy places, going to Athens, for example, and so on. There were many businessmen, of course. There were people going for religious reasons. There were Turks going to also for the Haji rituals and so on. There were missionaries, and of course we also see in some years all these merchants. They were, of course, very important, and from Romanian sources, which I know better, we see that all these Romanians going for their own businesses to Constantinople, sending their agents, having different businesses and different. So I have some numbers for some years, because the Austrians, they were very careful at counting everyone, and they also did some sort of statistics on and also some sort of measuring and trying to put them into different categories. So we know some things, and beyond this, it's possible to divide all these travelers into some categories.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Waiting for your questions. Constantin, were they also postal services there? I mean, were they used as postal service, or did they have the quickest way?
It was all these steamships were used as postal steamships. They were used so the company carried the Austrian mail for free, and in exchange for this, the Austrian government extended the monopoly for this company to ship on to run on the river. So there was no other shipping company allowed by the Austrian government. It was a Hungarian company that was established in 1895. So bit late. Yes. So it was a postal company, and it was this postal services that also allowed the Austrian government to be involved to have one delegate in the board of administration to see how the company was run. And it was a similar agreement that the Austrian government also concluded with the Austrian Lloyd shipping company, and it was by the 1850s it became standard for governments to give this sort of subsidies in exchange for postal for transportation of mail and so on.
And on the other hand, of course, I guess they weren't used to carry trade or something like that, with the exception of extremely, I guess, expensive wares, etc. Isn't
it? They were expensive for cargo transportation, but we do see how all these ships like transformed themselves over the decades in order to fit to the demands of the market. And for example, the first ships that plied on from Vienna downstream, they also carried cargo, and the passengers kept complaining that you do not have enough space to walk on the deck because it's full of, for example, carriages, or it's full of different goods that were. So they started to invest heavily in ships that were used for cargo transportation, and the ones for passengers, they were transformed so as to allow some sort of private berths, so as to also have some cabin for female passengers, because there was this segregation to keep women in a separate cabin. There were many problems in relation to this, but by the 1840s, the company invested heavily in separating the transportation of passengers and the transportation of cargo. It was not the same for the last leg, the maritime one in the Black Sea, and people complained of this fact that the deck was full with cargo. But usually it was either valuable goods or specimens. It was not for the transportation of for example, of grain or yeah.
Jelena.
Well, I haven't heard you, but and so you probably have said everything, but I just very shortly to know what kind of company was that? Is it Austrian Lloyd or is it another company?
It's Donau Dampfschifffahrtsgesellschaft.
The
one on the
famous
river.
Donau. Right. And these ships in 1840, Constantin, they were wooden ships, huh? With wheels.
Yes, they were wooden ships. Then in the 1840s, so they were built in shipyards, in local shipyards on the Danube. They were built. The company was founded by two Englishmen, who one was an engineer, the other one was more of a businessman with connections in Vienna. There were several attempts to introduce steamships on the Danube. The first one was in 1817. It failed, and so they started this company, and they built the ship. The hull that was built in a shipyard in Vienna, in Erdberg, and they brought the engine from Britain, from the Boulton and Watt engine. It was a modern type of engine, and then all of the steamships they built were the body of the ship was built in local shipyards, either in Vienna. They built a different shipyard in Budapest, and they built a different one in what's now Romania, in Turnu Severin, and they had also some workshops in Istanbul for repairing the
So
ships.
I mean, how did they pass in the iron gates?
Yeah, I mentioned that. A Hungarian engineer was appointed to do works. It was in 1830, and they started doing works. Some hydraulic. They also employed some British engineers to come to. They brought some underwater balloons, so they removed some of the most dangerous rocks in the river. But the lucky event was that in 1834, it was such a dry year, so they managed to see all the rocks in the river, and they managed to map the rocks. Mm-hmm. And they then knew what the dangerous. It was one of the driest years ever recorded in. So they could take one steamship in 1834 because they saw where the danger was. And starting in 1834, they introduced a line from the Iron Gates to Galați, and then they built at the same time in Trieste, in the same manner as I was saying, building the body of the ship and bringing the engine from Britain. It was this partnership with the Boulton and Watt, one of the biggest manufacturers of engines, and they built a total of 7 seagoing ships. And when they started really big. It was the first company to have a line from Istanbul to Trebizond, for example, to Trapezund, to the Georgian market, and also one to Salonika, one that went all the way to Smyrna and then was extended to Alexandria. But they understood.
What time are we talking about, Constantin?
This is late 1830s.
So we have wooden steamships with wheels, going through Sulina, the delta of the Danube, down to Istanbul, and even to Smyrna.
Yes.
Wow.
There were seven maritime seagoing ships that they had. There was a different British company, and it was at the same time that competition was really huge on the Mediterranean market and the Black Sea. There was the Russian steamship company. This Russian steamship company was functional since 1831. You're talking
about Ropit.
Not Ropit. Not. There was a previous one established by Vorontsov, by Prince Vorontsov of the Odessa. He had they attempted to build some steamships in the Black Sea. There was a shipyard in Odessa, which a shipyard would be, but also in Eupatoria, in Evpatoria, and in Nikolaev. But Nikolaev was the most important point because of the Russian admiralty in Nikolaev. But they brought a British steamship, which came all the way from St. Petersburg, in fact, around Europe, and it started to ply in 1833 from Odessa to Constantinople. And at the same time, in 1833, there's this Lloyd company created in Trieste, and they, in fact, it took several years to really have steamships available, but they started in 1837. So 1837 is a very important year. And at the same time, in 1837, there's the French postal company having steamships from Marseille.
Messagerie Maritime?
Before Messagerie Maritime.
Before Messagerie,
So
okay.
Messagerie Maritime was established in 1852 by taking the contract that this company, it was the French case is very interesting because they started this line with state steamships. They were all military steamships belonging to the Navy, but they didn't want to in a way ruin the private market. So they were only for the transportation of passengers and for some specimens, not for the transportation of cargo. And when the Frenchmen started, this pushed even more the Austrians, the Österreichischer Lloyd, to start their own push towards this market. And of course, I presented only this topic about the Danube and so on, but I'm looking very closely at all these shipping companies. Syros was a very important place because they met there. There were two main lines, let's say. One line was from all these destinations to Istanbul. The other one was to Alexandria. So they met there was a huge push towards Alexandria. And there were, all in all, there was also the British and Peninsular Steamship Company. They had their steamships going to Alexandria. Then there was this shuttle service across the Suez region. The canal was not there. And then other steamships took passengers all the way to India. So they were at the same time, but I would say the most important year would be around 1840, when there were about 10 such steamship companies in the region, including an Ottoman one that was established. All of them were so all these ships were also important in military terms. So they all had agreements with their governments. They got some sort of subsidies in order to be used for military needs, if such a, yeah. And this Austrian company I mentioned today, the Danube Steamship Company, this sold its maritime fleet in 1844 to the Austrian Lloyd, and it remained as a solely fluvial company, and it survives to this day. It still exists in Vienna. It does the same business. It's one of the oldest shipping companies in the world, and they have very nice cruise ships on the Danube, and it's great that they survived. Yeah.
Wow, I'm sorry. This is so this is very early and we know nothing about it. And that is, you've written a book about this?
I've written, so my book is about the Danube, only the Danube. So,
Okay.
and the book is it's also what I presented today, but the book is about how this Austrian company, in fact, this is the main claim of my book, how it was the link that in fact connected the Romanian principalities to Europe. So we always speak about this Europeanization and about about Westernization and so on. And I say that this is the main way in which the Romanian lands were linked to Europe, both in relation to Vienna, Western Europe, and through the east towards Southern Europe and so on. So this is the first, let's say, link that we very clearly see, and it's also about the ships in themselves. Not about, we always say about Paris and so on, and Vienna and all these nice places, but the ship itself was a place where, a space where all these people from Southeastern Europe, where they witnessed Europe, where they saw what it meant to be civilized, because once you boarded this ship, you needed to show that you are civilized, that you can speak foreign languages, that you are educated, that you know manners and so on. And this Austrian ship was a very democratic space, because it didn't really matter what you were as a person, a Muslim or a Christian or an Englishman or a Russian. It was a very democratic space, because commodification of transportation comes with this price of the ticket. Once you buy it, you have the right to be part of this society. And when spending 2 weeks on board these ships, for example, for someone going all the way from Vienna to Constantinople, it took 2 weeks. And not in this presentation. And for example, 2% of the people who fly, it's one of the results of statistics, form a relationship, ending in marriage in a plane. So if you fly 12 hours from Athens to Los Angeles, there are some chances, 1 in 50, that you will meet the special person. So it's just very important to say that 2 weeks is a very long time for such social bonds. And you do a lot of businesses, you do many things on board these ships. And in the book, I looked at the role of this connection in relation to Romania. Now I work to finish a book in English, which will look at all these early steamship companies. So my intention is not, I will probably not focus on the second half of the 19th century, which is better now, the Ropit and also the Greek steamship company, on all the ones that started to do business after the Crimean War. I'm interested in these early initiatives, and they all have in common some things. Technology was still very expensive at the time, so it was not cheap at all to build such a steamship. Technology was always British. There were attempts everywhere in Eastern Europe to build local steamships, in Russia, even in the Ottoman Empire, in Austria and so on. But they just couldn't build good enough engines. They could build the body of the ship. They even later, starting in the 1840s, the Austrians started to build iron, and so they started to move beyond wood. But still, the engines were not good enough to be commercially run. So they were not, because you could build it cheaper, but the maintenance was so expensive that they understood that it's more efficient to buy British technology. So this is one element. A different element was that you needed also British engineers. So all these workshops and these steamships, they had British engineers, and it took some decades. It was only in the 1850s that the Ottomans, for example, started to educate their own specialists, and the Russians did the same. The Russians, in this Russian steamship company, they had an exception for British engineers. They wanted to employ local people, with the exception of British engineers, because they were the ones to provide technological support. There were other things that were important. All these steamship companies, they needed government support. They couldn't run commercially. They needed some sort of support. Even the British, the Peninsular and Oriental Company, they needed to get subsidies. They only started new lines when they got the financial support. And it was the same for the French, this postal company, also for the Austrian Lloyd. Everyone was first heavily
but it's very important that you will do the work for these early steamship passenger lines, which we know nothing about, running all with the wooden ships. So we're talking about the 1830s, from 1820s to 1840s, huh?
I will. So there are some important changes that happen in the late 40s and early 50s. And the changes are also technological. There are some important technological changes in relation to the propeller, for example. They started to be faster. They started to be more economically profitable because of more space on the deck to carry goods, not to have the huge wheels of the first steamships. So there are some technological changes. They start in the late 1840s. They are introduced gradually after the Crimean War. There's also an important change with the Messagerie Maritime, when the French also changed the way they support this, and also because technology becomes cheaper and it's more affordable, so competition is more important. And I also look at for what I do in relation to the Black Sea, it's almost at the same time when the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea get steamship companies. And all this, the British company, the Peninsular, for example, also opens a connection to Trabzon. They also look at and they are interested to get to Georgia, to Poti. They look at the market of Georgia, Transcaucasia. Persia is also interesting. And the Russians also, in the late 40s, they buy some more ships. They were the ones that will be used in the Crimean War, because all these shipping companies, they are important for how the armies were mobilized during the Crimean War, because the navies just did not have enough ships to serve everyone that wanted the steamship during the Crimean War. So I look at how all these different lines, how they intersected in the, and there are some hubs, and I'm interested in all these small hubs that become really important as a result of steamships. For example, one such hub is Syros, which becomes a very important place, as it was the place where passengers could change ship and go from a destination to a different one. And there were several such steamships. And a different element is it's also related to Greece, in that, for example, the Lloyd was the one
Austrian
to also
Lloyd.
The Austrian Lloyd, yes. They also invested, and the Danube Steamship Company also invested, and I'm interested also in this economy of time, because when you carry passengers, this is a very important element. How fast you can go, how reliable is the journey, how secure, but also how fast. And I was mentioning that in 20 years, they managed to bring travel times to half of they originally were. And in this economy of time, they also started to see the importance of canals. For example, in Dobroja, if you go from Cernavoda to Constanța, you can go by a road or by a railway, or just or by a canal. And they calculated how much time you save, and they translated time into money. And so one such idea was also in relation to Greece, across the what's the name,
The Corinthian Canal. Yeah,
they had a sort of also a shuttle to save time and not to lose time by going around yes. So they were the first ones to get such contracts from this one was negotiated with the Greek state. It was a very good contract. Also, in exchange for this, the Lloyd had the contract with the Greek state to carry mail, the Greek mail, and so they started to have all these ideas in which to, and of course I look at many other things that are related to this economy of building, of establishing steamship lines. For example, coal is a very interesting component, because you need coal if you want to have such lines.
Constantin, you're certainly into your book, so I won't make another question because it will kill me. Maybe somebody else wants. So that was extremely interesting for me. Thank you so much. I look so much forward for this book. Is this already done?
It's parts of it.
Okay.
But I hope to have some more time, because I will have the second semester I won't teach, so I have it for writing. So I hope to finish
we'll have you presenting as your next book sometime next year, I hope.
I hope to finish it by next summer.
Good.
So it will take some more time to publish it, but anyways, this is what I want to do.
That's lovely. And so you talk to us about this is a Romanian book, a book in Romanian.
The book is in Romanian. The book is in Romanian, and there's a shorter version of it in an article on what it means, this social experience of traveling, which is not very interesting for the larger steamships. If you are on a very large steamship and you have your own cabin, you have your own place, you only meet other people at different times of the day. But for these small steamships, they were always together. So just 50 people in a small cabin, they had to spend time together. And I looked at what it means to spend such time in a confined place, and to what it means to be mobile at this early stage in the revolution of transportation.
Yeah, they did time together, as we say. And
yes.
Yeah, tell me something, Constantin. You didn't mention it, or I lost it. how many stops were there? I mean, if you go from the Iron Gates to Galați, you stop 3, 4, 5 times or just once?
So there are, from the Iron Gates to Galați, there were about 3 compulsory stops. One was in Corabia, usually to load some more coal, or that usually such stops. A different one was the Giurgiu, which was the station for Bucharest. So Giurgiu is about 80 kilometers from Bucharest. So everyone going to or from Bucharest would get off in Giurgiu, and then Brăila and Galați. So there were 3, 4 stops.
So
From Galați to Istanbul, it depended on the period. Sometimes there was a stop in Tulcea, if they had some business there. Always a stop at Varna, and then in Constanța, if there were also travelers, and Varna in Istanbul. And always the voyage from Galați to Istanbul lasted for about 50 hours, 52, so 2 days, 2.5 days. This was the travel time. For the Hungarian and Austrian sections, it was they had different steamships with different speeds, as we would have now for a train. You have this sort of accelerated, or this sort of higher speed intercity going from Vienna, stopping at Bratislava and then Budapest, or you had a slow this sort of ship stopping at all the small villages and towns and linking in fact the entire region. So as I was saying, by the 1840s they had 20 steamships on these small sections of the river. So it's really vital for so they had, for example, also a steamship to do the link on in what's now Budapest, between Buda and Pest, between the 2 parts of the Hungarian capital. So they had different ships for different needs.
Yeah, so in reality, Lower Danube is different than the Austro-Hungarian area.
It's completely different.
Yeah,
Completely different.
You don't go out much, you just go to your
yes.
business.
Yes.
More third-class travelers.
Yes. Yes.
Less tourism.
Yes.
More business-like through the.
Yes. It changed later in the century. By the 1870s, they also had all these slow speed ships. But for this period, they only have this sort of intercity steamships.
So, νομίζω ότι Σοκράτη, δεν σε ακούμε. We can't hear you.
Just one more question. How about the hygienics of the sort? I mean, 50 people crowded on a small ship. That should have been some. I mean,
it was in fact a very serious problem. This was really serious, and everyone kept complaining about this, about the how. And they kept complaining about what it means to sit together, packed in a small cabin, and the odors and the problems, and keeping windows open or closed, and all these problems, and the problems with water and with toilets and so on. They are really important. They kept complaining, and the Austrians kept saying that they will find solutions, and in fact there were not many solutions that you can have. So it's a problem. Usually Western travelers, they were very unhappy, such conditions, but you had to just...
So, I mean, it didn't change up to the end? I mean,
it changed a bit later, but it still remained a problem. It remained a problem throughout the period, and as much as I know, even later in the century. Yeah, that's a very serious problem.
Nikos Megapanos?
Just one more question that popped as I'm trying to imagine these people going down the stream. If, for instance, there is a crime committed on one of those ships, somebody, I don't know, gets drunk or kills somebody, what is the jurisdiction there? Is it they are arrested given to the Austrian police, or they have the local?
That's a very interesting question, which they negotiated when they started this cruises along the Danube. The Danube itself was an international river, so there was no national jurisdiction on the river itself. There were some problems, as you mentioned, some fights between different people. There were some Austrian gendarmes on board the ship, and they would take care of all these troublemakers. It was easy to just disembark those who did it, and they did sometimes such things, but it really depended on the let's say on the section of the river, because usually all those who, and it really depended on who the person was, because if it was still in a Romanian port as part of the Ottoman Empire, the capitulation regime still applied. So meaning if it was, for example, a British man, you couldn't do much until the ship would enter Austrian territory. So it's interesting because the Austrians regarded the Ottoman section of the river as international, but their own section of the river as national jurisdiction. So usually the entrance into, and I have a section in the book about these steamships as sort of revolutionary spaces, because many of the passengers were all these revolutionary. For example, the Bulgarian Revolution in 1876 started with the Bulgarians hijacking an Austrian steamship and taking it from the Romanian to the Bulgarian side of the river and arresting the captain of the steamship and saying, we have nothing against you, we just want to get to Bulgaria to fight for the country. And so when a steamship would go upstream the river, when it got to Orshova, the entrance into the Austrian territories, there was a very serious sort of search, looking also for goods that were prohibited in the Austrian Empire, but also for unwanted people, those involved in the Hungarian Revolution in 1848, or some compromised figures. So there was a very serious control of who was entering the empire, and the Austrian police was very involved in keeping the empire safe from such bad persons. Mm-hmm. So it really depended on the section, and really depended on who the perpetrator was.
Thank you.
Okay, Socrates, I think we should call it off for today, because it's been, usually we go up to 5:30, but we got excited here.
Thank you very much, Constantin. Let's hope that we'll see each other very, very soon live.
Okay.
Somewhere in the Black Sea or the Mediterranean.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too, and everybody else. Thank you very much. And to everybody. Oh, we have a final question by Mr. Fisarakis. Just a small question, Kostas.
I want to give congratulations about the revolutionary lecture that I am very impressed from the steamships, evolution of steamships in the canals of Danube, and it's very interesting. Today we have a new knowledge about the story of steamships, especially of river steamships, the early of 19th century. Very interesting, and we expect the book and the new knowledge about this subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kostas. Konstantin, hope to see you soon.
Yes.
And Merry Christmas to all of those.
Me too. Merry Christmas.
Okay.
Happy New Year
Happy
to
New
all
Year.
your family.
Enjoy the holiday.
Thank
Enjoy the
you.
holidays.
And
Merry Christmas.
we look forward for a presentation in Crete of your next book. Okay.
I hope so. Yes. Bye, everyone. Stay
Bye.
well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Γεια σας και
Καλή
αύριο
χρονιά σε όλους. Ναι. Καλά Χριστούγεννα. Γεια σε όλους.
Χρόνια πολλά, καλές γιορτές.
Καλές γιορτές. Ναι.
Πολύ ωραία η παρουσίαση αυτή.
Άστε καλά.